But we're going to start on that email from a Liberal MP to caucus calling for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to resign. The first open push for a leadership change from inside the caucus. The CBC's Aaron Weary is here with me now. So Aaron, walk us through this Wayne Long email.
So yes, the latest is that Wayne Long sent this email to essentially all of Liberal caucus, a kind of message to all of the MPs, saying, it's a fairly brief message, saying that he believes it's time for a new leader. Wayne Long is not a stranger to some disagreements with the party, going back to 2017 when he disagreed with their position on small business tax reform. Mm-hmm. So he's always been a bit of an independent-minded MP. So it's not entirely surprising that he would be, a bit on his own on this, or at least, sort of outside the circle on that. But this is, as you say, the first time we've had from within the Liberal caucus an expression of the idea that the Prime Minister needs to go.
Right. So I think we have the email here that we can maybe show you. It's from Wayne Long it's 155 people on this email list. It says, for the future of our party and the good of our country, we need new leadership and a new direction. And he writes this after reflecting on this week's defeat in Toronto St. Paul's and seeing the response. I want you to know clearly and directly where I stand. So he says that's what precipitated it. Now, Aaron, I've been talking to Liberal MPs. Ken MacDonald, the MP from Avalon, also a critic of the government, he replied to this with, well said. I'm told then Mark Gerritsen, who's a Kingston area MP and a supporter of the Prime Minister, replied saying, for those of us planning to run again, using reply all to vent isn't helpful. Please feel free to email me directly. And just a few minutes ago, I was told that Chandra Arya, who is a Liberal MP here in Ottawa, replied all, criticized the Prime Minister for taking the party too far to the left and accused the Prime Minister and his senior staff for making some strategic mistakes, but says, we've accomplished a lot. He's been a consequential Prime Minister, and I still support him, and I will be happy to run under him. So it seems like Wayne Long, whatever his intentions were here, has burst the dam for an aggressive conversation in the caucus.
Yeah, look, I think the other caveat here is that Wayne Long is not running again, as Mark Gerritsen sort of implied there.
Ken MacDonald is not running again.
Ken MacDonald is not running again. So it may be cast these things in a different light, but the threat, the risk for the Prime Minister is that, as you say, this sort of breaks the dam, and it, to mix our metaphors, it sort of snowballs after this, right? I think that you've already seen last night or this morning, Catherine McKenna's statement suggesting that she believes the Prime Minister should leave. It's not so much one of these statements. It's the idea that after one has come out, another follows and another and another. And soon you're dealing with a pretty sizable number of people.
Yeah, and these aren't Chrétien-era Liberals, they aren't Martin-era Liberals or BC Liberals like Christy Clark saying it, who many people say is now a Conservative. These are current elected Liberals inside the caucus, and whether they're running again or not, they're part of the governing team.
Yeah, it just keeps getting closer, I guess, is one way to look at it. When a couple Liberal ministers from, as you say, the Chrétien era, the Martin era come out and suggest, or Percy Down, late last year suggests that the Prime Minister needs to be changed, or that there needs to be a new leader at the top of the Liberal Party. That's one thing. But as these kind of get closer to the actual sort of center of the party, to some of the major names within the party, that's, I think, when it becomes that much more politically risky for the Prime Minister.
Okay, just stick right there, Aaron, because we're going to add to this conversation now with a discussion and a focus on the private conversations that Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault that he never intended to share publicly, let alone see in the pages of the Toronto Star. Guilbeault has been reaching out to Liberal MPs, rattled by this week's by-election loss, but he made the mistake of making these calls and discussing what he heard while sitting in the business lounge of a Via Rail train station where he was sitting within earshot of Justin Ling, a freelance journalist and a contributing columnist for the Toronto Star, who published what he heard in the column you see there on the screen, and Justin Ling joins me now. Okay, so Justin, a lot's happening today. What did you overhear sitting next to Stephen Guilbeault?
I heard the Environment Minister sitting there in the business lounge of Union Station, hitting the phones, doing outreach, recapping his last few days in Toronto, which involved some one-on-one meetings with several Toronto area MPs who are, in his words, he said in one French conversation, "10A." They're annoyed, they're frustrated, and they're tired, and they're stressed out. He was feeling the temperature of the Toronto area caucus to see if any of those MPs were willing or interested in calling for the Prime Minister's resignation. He was trying to figure out what they wanted, what would make them happy, what the Prime Minister, what the Prime Minister's office needs to do to keep this caucus together and to save his own skin, to save the future of the party, and to win the next election. Those conversations were held quite loudly, I can tell you, and within my earshot. I didn't really do much to try and pick them up, but I can tell you that in the hours afterwards, on my 5-hour train ride on a very delayed train back to Montreal, I had conversations with several members of caucus who had not heard from Guilbeault, but who confirmed the details that there is a sedition caucus inside the Liberal Party, as one MP put it to me, and they are pretty unhappy.
Okay, so you overheard Stephen Guilbeault. He issued a statement today saying one-sided conversations taken out of context do not reflect the open and honest exchanges that I routinely have with my colleagues. As I have said publicly many times, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has my full support. Now, Stephen Guilbeault was calling around in support of Justin Trudeau. This is an important thing to speak about, because when you say there's a sedition caucus, he is definitely not one of them. But what did Stephen Guilbeault and the Prime Minister's office and everyone say to you when you followed up with them on what you overheard?
Yeah, it's really important to note that the Guilbeault was, I think, doing the best he could to try and keep caucus together, although he did say pretty bluntly, I heard him on more than one occasion say that there is a campaign to push the Prime Minister out the door, and that he was not 100% sure that the Prime Minister could survive this, that ultimately it was up to the PM to heed those concerns and to respond to them, and if he doesn't do so effectively, he's out of the job. Now, I reached out to Guilbeault, I reached out to some of the MPs who were identified to me as those who may be staging the revolt. I reached out to PMO. Of all of those requests, only PMO responded, and they didn't tell me much. All they did was confirm that the Prime Minister is making calls to some MPs, but they really did not extrapolate much beyond that. I've spoken to members of caucus over the last 24 hours who have told me that they're starting to lose their minds because they're expressing to the Prime Minister's office what level of change and reform and action needs to happen. And thus far, they've seen, as one MP kind of put to me in a text, zero zilp, nada, zippo. Like he kept inventing new ways of saying zero, nothing at all. So I think people are starting to freak out a little bit.
Okay, I want to get thoughts from you and Aaron, but I've also been talking to a lot of members of the Liberal caucus. Most they want change, though they can't articulate specifically what the change might be and how it could turn things around for them. But loyalty to the Prime Minister is saying it's up to him to decide. You think it goes further. Who are the seditious MPs you've identified in your reporting, and what is the sort of change they want to see from Trudeau?
So this is really interesting because last night I spoke to one member of Parliament who had someone read aloud the letter that Wayne Long published today. He did not have a copy of it, but he had seen it at the very least.
Interesting.
I was told that there was several other MPs who had considered signing that letter. Their names ultimately didn't appear on it when Wayne Long sent it to caucus today. I just got off the phone. You saw me on the phone before we started the show talking to someone in caucus who told me that the momentum seems to have stalled on that letter, that people are now playing a wait-and-see approach, Ken MacDonald being the only MP to sort of express support for it. 3 or 4 others who had originally signaled their support for the letter aren't there, and they've been rather quiet. One of them responded basically saying this is the wrong way to go about it. There may be 15 to 20 MPs who are this sedition caucus, but the majority of the Liberal Party, there's 150 some MPs, are waiting to see if the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office is willing to reform itself. They have a list of demands. They vary across the country, I think, but the one thing I've heard consistently has been they want to see changes in cabinet. They think there are underperforming ministers. Althea Raj, I know, has just reported and confirmed some of those. They include Chrystia Freeland and Melanie Joly. They want to see changes in the staff of the Prime Minister's office. They want to see concerns from caucus actually being listened to, heeded, and they're tired of the sort of father knows best approach that's been employed by the Prime Minister for now 9 years in power.
Okay, all right. Justin, thank you for joining us. Aaron, your thoughts when you hear all of this you've written a book on this Prime Minister. You know him and his team reasonably well. What do you think he can or might do to sort of calm things down? Because a lot of caucus management needs to happen. Yeah,
I mean, this isn't the first time the caucus management issue has come up. I think the first flashpoint for that was the SNC-Lavalin affair, which is now years in the rear view. So I don't know how much caucus management can be fixed at this point. I mean, I think this PMO's and this PM's instinct in situations like this is to sort of, not panic. Let's be calm. Let's figure this out. Let's not rush into anything. I don't know whether people are going to give them that time to figure that out. And I don't know whether the PM is necessarily going to look at this and say, okay, I'll make a bunch of changes to my office and my cabinet. I think there was no surprise that this government was in some trouble, was trailing in the polls. The losing St. Paul's puts that in such stark relief and makes it so easy to sort of extrapolate out and look at other ridings and start thinking about where else the other losses could be. And I think the Prime Minister has to decide, whether he can stick this out, and whether, at this point, the idea that he is the best, leader to lead this party into the next election, I think that's the question he has to answer for himself.
Okay. The CBC's Aaron Wary, freelancer Justin Ling, and contributing columnist to the Toronto Star. Thank you much. Current and former Liberals are speaking bluntly about the Prime Minister's prospects after the party's shocking loss in a Toronto by-election. Liberal MP Wayne Long has written an email to his colleagues today saying, for the future of our party and for the good of our country, we need new leadership and a new direction. Meanwhile, former Trudeau Cabinet Minister Catherine McKenna released a statement saying, in part, the Liberal Party isn't about one person. The Prime Minister has a legacy to be proud of, but it's time for new ideas, new energy, and a new leader. And freelance reporter Justin Ling wrote in the Toronto Star about conversations he overheard with Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, where Guilbeault discussed the potential for unhappiness in Liberal ranks to fester and possibly turn into a campaign to show Trudeau the door. So, no shortage of things to talk about with the Friday Power Panel. Nigan Sinclair is a columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. And the CBC's Jason Markusoff is in Calgary. Okay, where to begin? Our colleague Althea Raj is also reporting now in the Toronto Star that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has spoken twice to Mark Carney about joining cabinet as finance minister, which is a detail that I'm sure may be a shock to Chrystia Freeland. Nigan, what do you make of this kaleidoscope of Liberal revelations today?
Well, it's certainly lots to write about on a Friday, especially considering the events in the United States last night and the idea that we can still compete with that, even though, the thing that's going on in the States, I don't want to talk about that. But the reality is that there's when cabinet disunity reaches the public, it becomes a major issue that goes back to the days of Martin Chrétien that then festers. And as we know, Parliament's no longer sitting, so we're on kind of the barbecue circuit. And so therefore, people are starting to talk more and starting to open up into larger issues, and people are quite nervous following the events of the by-election. I don't actually believe that Trudeau is going to leave until I start to hear that the inner circle of Trudeau is the ones talking to the media. And while we do have reports of overhearing ministers talking perhaps about their worries about Trudeau's leadership, it's not until I hear, let's say, Mark Miller talking to the media, or let's say Chrystia Freeland talking to the media. I mean, politicians are defined really by their inner circle, and their inner circle in this, Trudeau's inner circle in this case, is not talking just yet. And while Catherine McKenna is an important voice within the Liberal Party, I don't think it's Catherine McKenna that will be the tipping point. I think it will be a much more bigger inner circle. I see Trudeau, he's got all of his chips in the middle based on his legacy for this upcoming election, and all signs point to him committed to that.
Emily, I would agree at this point in time, on the Friday going into the Canada Day weekend, that the Prime Minister is sticking and his inner circle is sticking. But I don't know how things go once caucus MPs start sending, he's got to go resignation letters, and where it spirals from there, and then leaks about conversations about bringing in unelected people to replace your Deputy Prime Minister in the Finance Minister's office as your chief economic messenger. Then there's a life of things that you just cannot control. What are your thoughts on all this?
There is a loss of control inside the Liberal Party, and we've seen it. And it's kind of, there's two things happening. There's the by-election and the fact that, the government, the Canadian government hasn't been doing well. And that Pierre Poilievre is doing better in the polls than Trudeau. That's one thing. And then there's everybody panicking about that, and the panic itself basically meaning that you're shooting yourself in the foot. And that's the story that we're discussing tonight, is that people saw the election result, and that was a story earlier this week. And the very fact that we know about those things, that there is that the caucus being unhappy, it has reached the point of people, us in the media knowing about that level of unhappiness to that point that there are now emails being leaked, that people conduct business caucus inside the viral business lounge. Those are all signs that, if you're unsure whether or not the Liberals are in great shape, what happened in the last 48 hours gave you something to think about. And so it's very much, it seems to me very much like some sort of a panic attack, where it's actually the situation that caused it. We understand it, but at the same time, it's how you react to it that is making things worse. And so now I'm not seeing the leadership inside the Liberal caucus to be making strategic next steps in a way that's not going to lead to more shooting yourself in the foot. That's what I'm worried about. Who has the cold blood, the common sense to be thinking about the next steps in a way that's not going to make the crisis of confidence into the Liberal caucus even worse, sorry.
Yeah, Jason, Nigan talks about the barbecue circuit. I don't know if that started, but there are flames sprouting up, right, when you have this sort of stuff happening. What do you think of where the Liberals are right now with this?
I mean, the fact that things moved so fast, like from development to development to development, from McKenna to Stephen Guilbeault to this Carney stuff to Wayne Long and who knows how long that reply all thread is going to become on that. Nigan talked about the inner circle, that he's not going to believe that he's gone till the inner circle starts talking about that. I think what we're starting to see is kind of a series of concentric circles, and this happens with the collapse of leadership. I think back to Chrétien. I think back to a lot of other collapse and drama of a leadership. In a party, first you have the former ministers, some of the old types, John Manley, Catherine McKenna. Then you have the Wayne Longs and Ken McDonalds, these people who are these MPs, but they're retiring. So some people will say, well, let's have someone with skin in the game say this. But the thing is that it's the people who are retiring who have less to lose, who give license to those who have a bit more to lose. So then perhaps we'll see somebody who's like, I want to win again, and I don't think we can win again under Trudeau. Let's maybe try it. And then maybe you see cabinet ministers. So, we've seen this script before. Look, he could stem the tide. He could restore confidence, maybe with some kind of drastic move like Carney, like widespread rebuilding of his PMO or his cabinet. But until he does something like that, I expect to see us keep nibbling further and further in toward that inner circle. Yeah, there is this, and I'm actually texting with a caucus member while we're having this conversation, trying to find out exactly what the latest information is. There's a couple of them reaching out, but like Nigan, there has been this push and this call for a caucus meeting to sort of clear the air. The pushback I'm hearing is that you can't get everyone into a room to vent and sharpen their knives if you don't have a plan to put in front of them, because it just becomes a media event essentially where the lashing out and the finger pointing becomes a narrative and there's no solution thing. But how do you respond to something like this, do you think? If it may not be the people closest to him who are saying he's got to go, and it may not be his cabinet, but there's 155 people in that caucus on that email chain all getting this, and then there's a bunch of people in the broader party who are anxious and worried after a tough year in the polls and a really bad night on Monday.
Yeah, and I think that, we mentioned before the end of the sitting of Parliament, which then leads people to want to get attention in other ways, particularly for those who are fighting for their lives or maybe seeing a lack of support within their own riding or hearing those calls for their own removal due to Trudeau. And what ends up happening is that people are looking to see what ways that the party can turn things around, looking to see how much time is left, and then making scenarios in your head. And a lot of those scenarios are catastrophic scenarios if you look at the polling. The one thing that Trudeau always had is this kind of large-scale strategic plan in which to sort of keep safe seats, to keep the broader scope of the party, and then to keep unity as a result of these big-ticket items that he would make to sort of bring the party together, often during Parliament, whether it be over issues of gender or pharmacare and this is there was a massive strategic problem in giving up Carolyn Bennett's seat and making it vulnerable in a very big Liberal stronghold. And now we're seeing a by-election that's about to happen in Montreal, which then is also created as a result of perhaps a strategic mistake by the resigning of David Lametti. These kind of strategic elements then really break into the Trudeau kind of the foundation of Trudeau, which is that there was always this kind of strategic plan in it. So for Trudeau to be able to be seen as kind of cracks within the very foundation, that's where you start to see all this leakage.
Okay, so Emily, I want to ask you a little bit about Le Salle-Mar-Verdun, which is David Lametti's seat, and he has resigned because of the same cabinet shuffle where and Carolyn Bennett were demoted from cabinet, and they've both ultimately left their seats. And here we have a by-election in a seat that Paul Martin once held. And at the time they did that cabinet shuffle, the Liberals were behind in the polls, but only marginally. And their concern wasn't the urban cores, it was the suburban sort of fortress walls, right? Now they've lost St. Paul's. There's nobody that I know of who's running. Maybe that's where Mark Carney runs. I have no idea. But how much at risk are they in that seat in Montreal? And where do you see that one fitting into what's going on?
So the NDP candidate in that seat is Craig Sauvé. He's well known here in Montreal as a city councillor in that same area of Montreal, and so he's a very strong local candidate. It would be a political upset in a way if you had a second NDP MP elected in Montreal.
Right.
It would ask the question: can the NDP actually benefit from the Liberal fall in Quebec? Is there room for that? You also have Pierre Poilievre campaigning heavily in Quebec during the summer, and including in seats like Mont-Royal, where Anthony Housefather father is having an existential crisis for the last couple of months. And so you see as well that you could have both the Conservatives and the NDP actually trying to feast off the rest of the Liberals in the Montreal region. And so we're not ready to have a sense of what that looked like, I think, on a more national level, but it could be also an upset to be developed in the coming months as well.
Okay, I got to jump in because we only got about 20 seconds left. Jason, Le Salle-Mar, they've got that coming up. There's going to be another by-election in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. What are the stakes for the Liberals in 10 seconds or so?
Well, I think St. Paul made clear that there are no safe seats, and people would have thought that Island of Montreal, a seat like Lametti's, would be safe, but nobody's leaving anything to chance, which is why the panic is real.
Okay. We got to leave it there. We will talk about this again this summer. Nigan Sinclair, Emily Nicolau, Jason Marketsoff, thank you so much, and thank you.